Hello, Internet, and welcome to another episode of Quiz and Hers, the trivia podcast where we test each other's knowledge and the strength of our relationship in a 10-week battle for glory. My name is Justin, and I am here with the woman who has been leading all season until last episode.
Damn.
My fiancée, Hallie.
Hey. Sad.
Yeah, so I currently have an 11-10 lead with one game each left to play in the season. So this is the home stretch and things are very,
It could
very
be
close.
a tie.
In which case we will have to make up a tiebreaker rule on the spot. We'll see. Hopefully we won't have to do that.
It will just be a nice even tie.
Ah, that would be so lame.
I guess.
Anyway, if you are unfamiliar with the show, first of all, why are you starting with the second to last episode of the season? And wait.
Maybe they're really interested in whatever you're about to talk about.
Yeah, maybe.
Well, I don't know what it is yet, so we'll see.
Well, if you are new to the show, welcome. Thank you for listening. Maybe you want to start with the first episode of the season, but if not, here we go. Here's how the game works. Each week, one of us writes 6 trivia questions to ask the other person from each of our 6 different categories, which are arts and literature, sounds and screen, times and places, sports and games, science, and everything else. All 6 questions relate to some central theme that the game is usually titled for, and after each question, the person who wrote it will talk about the answer for about 5 minutes or so that we can all learn a little bit more about each topic. As we said, each correct answer is worth 1 point on the season. Currently I am up 11-10, but Hallie has a chance to build up her lead
Before the last game
when I have a chance to come back and try to win. So, here we go. Are you ready to play?
I'm ready.
Alright. So, today's game is called the Quizzish Invasion.
Okay.
Because all the questions will have to do with invasions of some kind or another.
Oh man, I thought it was all going to be about the British invasion.
That would be impossible.
That would be fun.
That would be impossible.
No, it wouldn't.
Yes, it would.
How? Why?
What's a sports question about the British invasion?
Sure, you can figure one out.
Well, I didn't.
Okay, fine.
Okay, ready?
Yep.
Alright, question 1. Arts and literature. In what satirical 1955 novel by Leonard Wibberley is the United States invaded by the bow and arrow wielding army of a tiny and fictional European nation called the Duchy of Grand Fenwick?
Are you fucking kidding me with this question?
This is a hard one.
What is this? What is wrong with you?
This is a hard question, although this does come up in trivia.
What is it, a novel?
Yeah, 1955 novel.
I don't know.
Okay. Do you want to guess?
I don't have a guess.
Okay. Alright, so it's called The Mouse That Roared.
I've never heard of it. What a shock. You just want to win the season, so you know you have to write a really hard game.
This is probably the hardest question.
Oh, good. That makes me feel better. Because I've never heard of that in my life.
Yeah, it does come up. I heard of it on, I don't know, some trivia thing at some point, and I was like, what the hell is that? And then I looked into it, and it's kind of awesome. So
Okay.
Okay. So, Wibberley got the idea for his novel when President Dwight Eisenhower tasked Secretary of State John Foster Dulles with finalizing the implementation of the peace treaty with Japan after World War II, transitioning Japan from an occupied nation to an independent one. Wibberley noted that the terms included generous amounts of aid for Japan, and he wrote an article in the Saturday Evening Post sarcastically urging his native Ireland to mount a half-hearted invasion of the U.S. to benefit from America's generosity to its vanquished foes. He developed the idea into a novel, which was serialized in the Post under the title The Day New York Was Invaded, and replaced Ireland with the fictional Duchy of Grand Fenwick.
Okay.
The duchy is described as a tiny, proudly pre-industrial nation located in the Alps between Switzerland and France. The economy is almost entirely dependent on the production and export of Pinot Grand Fenwick wine, but the nation's prosperity is threatened when a winery in California begins producing a knockoff.
I feel like this is like Luxembourg.
Yeah, it's sort of a Luxembourg, Liechtenstein, Andorra, Monaco kind of thing. Like just a little tiny European nation no one's ever heard of.
That's really rich.
Except this one's not real, but yeah.
Yeah.
It's not that rich actually, because it's a pre-industrial economy, and basically like all of their GDP is based on exporting this wine.
Okay.
Yeah, so Duchy's prosperity is threatened when a winery in California begins producing a knockoff of Pinot Grand Fenwick.
Oh no.
The Prime Minister of Grand Fenwick, Count Rupert Mountjoy, concludes that their only option is to declare war on the United States, using the imposter wine as a justification. This isn't a war he intends to win. After all, the tiny state's army consists of 24 men in chainmail armed with longbows. The goal is to be swiftly and utterly defeated, so that the U.S. will send aid to Grand Fenwick to rebuild after the war, as they had done with Germany and Japan after World War II. The U.S. State Department misplaces the declaration of war, and under the leadership of Field Marshal Tully Bascombe, the tiny Fenwickian army lands in New York City, which happens to be deserted because everyone is sheltered underground for a citywide disaster drill.
Just by coincidence?
Yes.
Okay.
There's a lot of coincidence in this. It's described as a satire.
Fun.
It also sounds very farcical.
Yeah. Well, I like a good farce.
Yeah. They wander into a top-secret government laboratory and accidentally steal the Q-bomb, a prototype weapon that could annihilate the entire world, developed by Professor Alfred Kokens.
Did you say they accidentally stole it?
Yes.
How do you accidentally steal something?
They just, wandered in and, found this absent-minded professor with his prototype and, took him prisoner.
I see. Okay.
Basically. They had no plans to. They just, walked into this lab by accident.
Uh-huh.
The Secretary of Defense works out what has happened and is humiliated to realize that a tiny nation he has never heard of now has the U.S. and indeed the whole world by the balls. Duchess Gloriana XII, the leader of Grand Fenwick, dictates the terms for peace. All nuclear weapons must be inspected by independent scientists led by Kokens, who just happens to be a Fenwick American and who moves back to his home country.
Oh my god. A Fenwick American.
Grand Fenwick becomes the leader of the Tiny 20, a new superpower composed of 20 micronations, and Duchess Gloriana and Field Marshal Bascombe marry.
I was going to say, they definitely get married.
Yes. The book ends with the absent-minded Kokens accidentally dropping the Q-bomb, only to discover that it is a worthless dud. He decides to keep this a secret.
Nice.
Wibberley's book was a success, and he went on to write a prequel, Beware of the Mouse, which explores the medieval history of the duchy, and 3 sequels, The Mouse on the Moon, in which the duchy accidentally discovers that Pinot Grand Fenwick makes excellent rocket fuel and wins the space race.
Oh my god.
The Mouse on Wall Street, in which Duchess Gloriana attempts to lose her country's budget surplus on the stock market and ends up breaking the world economy.
That's funny.
And The Mouse That Saved the West, in which the duchy accidentally solves the world's oil crisis.
Oh my god.
The original novel was also adapted into a 1959 film starring Peter Sellers as Duchess Gloriana, Prime Minister Count Mountjoy, and Field Marshal Bascombe, which sounds fucking amazing.
Where can we get this?
I know,
I have to see this.
I don't think it's
so good.
Anywhere. It's probably public domain by now, so it might just be on YouTube. I don't know, but
it reminds me of something Monty Python would do.
It does, yeah. It sounds fucking amazing.
Yeah.
And I will close with a final fact that I think is pretty hilarious. Wibberley's original intended title, which was used for the British version of the book, but not the American one, was The Wrath of Grapes.
Oh my god, why they couldn't do it for the American version?
They chose not to, I guess, because the Steinbeck estate would have had a problem with it.
Wow.
So they called it The Mouse That Roared.
That's a shame, because that's really fun.
Isn't that a great, that's a brilliant title.
Yeah, he's good.
Yeah.
Did he write, other series, or...
This is what he's known for.
Okay.
If he wrote anything else, it's nothing you'll hear about in trivia. This is what he's known for.
Well, it's not about trivia. Now I'm curious to read it, because it sounds fun.
I'm not sure. I didn't look into the rest of his career. This is the main thing.
Is he still alive?
I don't think so. If he is, he would be very old, because this was published in 1955.
Right, okay.
So I don't think he's still alive.
Gotcha.
But, I didn't read too much about him because I wanted to talk about the books and the sequels more than, his life.
Right.
Because he never really comes up.
What's his name? Wibberley?
Wibberley. Yeah, okay. Leonard Wibberley. And basically, if there's a question about him, the answer is The Mouse That Roared. And if there's a question about The Mouse That Roared, the answer is either Leonard Wibberley or the Duchy of Grand Fenwick.
Fenwick, yeah. Okay.
Alright, question 2. This one's easier, I think.
Okay, I hope so.
Everything else. Although it sounds like an invading act of war, What term actually just refers to when one company buys another against the wishes of the purchased firm? Or, actually I should say, against the wishes of the purchased firm's management,
Okay.
really.
The only word I can think of is siege. I'm going to say siege.
No, it's not a siege.
What is it?
Hostile takeover.
Oh, okay.
I also would have accepted corporate raid. That's a slightly different thing, but it's close enough that I would take it.
I was going to say something about a buyout. I don't know what that is.
A hostile takeover is a type of buyout. Yeah.
What if I said buyout?
I would have prompted.
Oh, I would not have gotten the prompt, so
Okay.
it doesn't really matter.
All right.
Business is not exactly my specialty.
No, but surely that's a term that you've heard.
Yeah, I've heard of it. I'm just not good at remembering business terms.
Okay. Well, in the business world, the term takeover refers to when one company, the buyer, purchases another, the target. In the UK, it specifically refers to the acquisition of a publicly traded company, whereas in the US, it means any instance of one company acquiring another. Prior to the 1950s, takeovers were almost all friendly, meaning that the prospective buyer would inform the board of the target company of his intent to purchase them. And I say his because we're talking about American business prior to the 1950s here.
Yeah.
Then the board would determine that the offer is in the best interest of their shareholders and agree to the purchase. Mm-hmm. Most acquisitions of private firms are friendly takeovers because the board and the shareholders are usually the same people. Right, so if a company is not publicly traded, the people running the company are also the people who basically have all of the stock, right?
Right.
Who own everything. Whereas if it's a publicly traded company, it's owned by stockholders, right?
Uh-huh.
Okay, so that's a friendly takeover. A hostile takeover is something quite different. They happen when the board of a company are opposed to the acquisition, perhaps because the new owners will replace the board with their own people, but the shareholders favor the acquisition and can therefore use their monetary control of the company to push through the deal against the wishes of the company's management.
Do you have an example?
I do. I have a few examples I'm going to get to. But first I'm going to talk about kind of how it happens. So there are various ways to initiate a hostile takeover. One is to make a so-called hostile tender, which is an offer to purchase the company at well above its current market value, essentially making the stockholders an offer they can't refuse to sell their shares.
Why would they do that?
What do you mean?
Why would they offer more money?
More than the fair market value?
Yeah.
Well, there'd be a couple reasons. So one would be to, say, eliminate a competing company, right? So that then you can raise your prices and recoup the loss. Another reason might be because you want to, get into a new sector, to kind of diversify your business into a new area, and instead of building up all the infrastructure from scratch, you just want to buy a company that already has all of that, and getting into that area is worth it to you to overpay.
Okay.
Right, so there's a few reasons why you might do it, So that's one way you can do it. Another approach is to engage in what's called a proxy fight, in which the buyer persuades enough shareholders to vote to replace the company's management with new people who will be receptive to the buyout. Another strategy, often seen in movies and such, is the creeping tender offer, in which the buyer slowly buys up enough stock on the open market in order to take control of the company.
That's not as common in real life.
Well, so it does happen. In movies and stuff, that's kind of the only version of this you ever see, is the guy says, I've acquired 51% of the stock in your company. I can control the board now. Ha 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 ha,
Yeah.
And that does happen in reality, but I think these other methods are typically more common because it's fucking hard to buy up 51% of the stock in a company.
Right.
So,
okay.
Yeah. The invention of the modern hostile tender offer is usually credited to financier Lewis Wolfson, who unsuccessfully attempted a hostile takeover of Montgomery Ward and Company, and was among the first businessmen to be labeled a corporate raider for his aggressive tactics. Hostile takeovers, and acquisitions more generally, exploded in the 70s and 80s with the advent of the leveraged buyout, a term coined by Victor Posner, another pioneer of the hostile takeover. Most hostile takeovers are leveraged buyouts, meaning that a majority of the capital that is paid to acquire the target company is lent to the buyer by banks, rather than spent from the buyer's own coffers. The reason for this is that debt has a lower cost of capital than equity does. Essentially, companies pay less tax when they use money to repay debt rather than when they spend it themselves. So the cash flow of the acquired company is then used to repay the debt if all goes well. But of course, all doesn't always go well. For instance, after Carl Icahn's infamous hostile takeover of Transworld Airlines in 1985, he found himself in need of additional capital for his other ventures, leading him to sell off many of TWA's routes and planes to other airlines, a decision that was criticized as asset stripping, and that ultimately bankrupted the company. Other well-known examples of hostile takeovers include Posner's 1969 acquisition of Sharon Steel Corporation, T. Boone Pickens' shocking 1984 acquisition of Gulf Oil, one of the largest companies to have ever been bought out at that time, Ronald Perelman's 1985 bidding war for Revlon and eventual sell-off of much of the company.
Perlman?
Ronald Perelman, not the actor.
Okay, sure.
Although I do like to imagine, I do like to imagine that this is like Hellboy engaged in a bidding war for a cosmetics company.
I was like, are you actually talking about Rob?
No. Ronald Perelman.
What's the cosmetics company?
Revlon.
Oh, okay.
So he got into a really fierce bidding war in 1985 and eventually bought out Revlon. And then he eventually ended up selling off most of the company anyway later.
Okay.
And Oracle's extremely aggressive takeover of PeopleSoft in 2004, in which over half the company's employees were laid off.
I'm still not sure what that is. The only context I have is something with course and roll. Isn't that what that course and roll was? Oracle?
Yeah, so Oracle is like a big software company.
Yeah.
And PeopleSoft is like a personnel, like HR management software, basically.
So they use it for course and roll in college?
Maybe. I don't know.
I swear that's what
I don't
it was.
remember. It's been a long time since I had to do that.
Yeah, me too. I just feel like that's my memory of it.
I don't know. Buyers attempting a hostile takeover are sometimes called Black Knights, and are sometimes thwarted by White Knights, competing buyers who make a better offer for a friendly takeover. As of 2018, there have been over 1,700 hostile takeovers in business history, with a total value of over $28 billion.
Well.
Yep. Alright, question 3. Times and places. This one you should get, but I don't know if you will.
Maybe. This is bad.
But
how am I supposed to get a lead here?
You should get this.
Oh, God.
This is something that you should just know as a trivia buff.
Yeah,
but you're bad at history, so you probably don't.
Exactly.
But you should.
Well, I will after this.
Alright, times and places. What year did the Norman invasion of England take place?
I don't know.
You should. This should be automatic.
I feel like I'm being put in a weird position here where I could be like 1,000 years off and embarrass myself because I know nothing. This is bad. If I say something really horribly wrong, can we edit this out?
We'll see.
For some reason in my mind, a number just popped in and I'm like, that's as good as anything else that I have in my brain.
Okay.
832.
It is not 832.
Am I close?
It's 1066.
No, that's not close enough. Actually, it's not that far away either.
Yeah.
It could be worse.
Yeah. I don't know where you got 832 from.
Oh, it was just a number that popped into my head, and I was like, that's as good a number as any, because I don't do years.
Norman invasion 1066. That should be as automatic as D-Day 1944.
I have like 10 years in my head. I don't think I have any more.
This should be one of them.
No, then I would have to lose an important one.
This one's important. This comes up all the time.
Okay.
This is like one of the most important dates in history.
You're just making this extra hard because you know you only have a 1-point lead and you're scared.
No. Any trivia...
This is the problem with the end of the season.
Any trivia buff should know that the Norman invasion was 1066. It should be completely automatic.
Okay.
Alright. So the Normans lived in the Duchy of Normandy in northwestern France, though they were originally of Viking heritage and were referred to as Northmen, which is where the term Norman comes from.
Didn't I talk about this?
I don't think so.
It was the,
the Norman Kingdom of Italy.
The Cades.
That was when the Normans controlled Sicily, right?
Yes.
Was it Sicily?
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, no, this is before that.
Okay.
Yeah. Anyway, so the Normans first became involved in England when King Ethelred the Unready married Emma of Normandy, the sister of Duke Richard II, the ruler of the duchy. Their son, Edward the Confessor, spent much of his youth in exile in Normandy, while England was controlled by Danish kings. But when Harthacnut died in 1042...
When her what?
When Harthacnut died...
Oh, I thought you said when her Thacnut, and I was like, what's a Thacnut?
No. Harthacnut was the last Danish king of England.
Oh, okay.
When he died in 1042, Edward the Confessor returned to England to reclaim the throne, and brought his Norman allies and advisors with him.
Okay.
In 1066, Edward died with no clear heir, and several men laid claim to his throne. The powerful English nobleman Harold Godwinson was elected king by the Witenagemot, which is basically a council of nobles.
It sounds like it should be in the book from the first question.
Yeah.
It sounds fake. Anyway.
Also in the mix was Harald Hardrada of Norway, whose claim was rooted in a supposed agreement between his predecessor Magnus the Good and Harthacnut, and William, the Duke of Normandy, who said that Edward had promised him the throne. He is known to history as William the Conqueror, so you can guess how this ends.
Uh-huh.
Harald Hardrada, the one from Norway, struck first, and allied with Harold Godwinson's exiled brother Tostig, but Godwinson surprised them outside of York and soundly defeated them at the Battle of Stamford Bridge. Hardrada and Tostig were both killed, but Godwinson's army was left weak and vulnerable to what came next. What came next was William of Normandy. The Normans landed in Sussex and quickly built a castle in Hastings from which they raided the nearby lands. This ensured that they were well supplied, and it was also meant to draw Harold to them, which it did. Harold left much of his army in the north to re-establish order, but took a force southward to confront William. When they arrived, William marched out of his castle to meet Harold in pitched battle. The Battle of Hastings began around 9 o'clock in the morning.
I've heard of that.
You should have. It's one of the most famous battles in history, and it took place on October 14th, 1066.
Got it.
Okay. The Battle of Hastings began around 9 o'clock in the morning on October 14th, 1066, and it's not completely clear how it played out, though it's mostly agreed that Harold's army was almost all foot soldiers with some archers, whereas William's was about half infantry and a quarter each cavalry and archers. As best as historians can reconstruct it, the English gained the initial advantage, sending some of William's army into retreat, but when the English pursued, William's cavalry swooped in and fucked them up. After this, William, who some men had mistakenly believed had been killed, rallied his troops and strategically faked withdrawal twice more, cutting down the pursuing English soldiers with his cavalry. The battle was decided when Harold was killed, but unfortunately sources are contradictory about what exactly happened. William thought that would be the end of it, but the Witenagemot hastily proclaimed the last heir of the House of Wessex, the teenaged Edgar the Etheling, as king. So, William did what William did and marched on London, eliminating any resistance he ran into, until the English nobles, including the still uncrowned King Edgar, surrendered at Berkhamsted. William was crowned William I of England on Christmas Day, 1066, in Westminster Abbey. He dealt with several revolts during his 21-year reign, but no serious threat to his rule ever emerged, and the House of Normandy controlled England until 1135. William's reign is notable for the replacement of English nobles with Norsemen, and the elimination of Old English as the language of the political and scholarly elite in favor of Anglo-Norman and Latin. He also commissioned the Domesday Book, the first census of England, which was unique in medieval Europe. That comes up a lot.
Domesday?
The Domesday Book, yep.
Okay.
The Battle of Hastings is depicted in the famous Bayeux Tapestry, which is thought to date to just a few years after this turning point in European history.
Cool.
Alright, question 4, sports and games. One of the more famous and more trivia-relevant storylines from the annals of professional wrestling is known as The Invasion, and it began when Vince McMahon bought two competing promotions and merged them with his World Wrestling Federation. Name either promotion, both of which presented stiff competition to the WWF during the 1990s.
WWE. No, that's definitely what he made it into.
Yeah, so that's, I'll mention that.
WCW?
Is that your answer?
Sure.
Yes.
Yeah.
World Championship Wrestling, WCW. Good.
Yay!
The other one is Extreme Championship Wrestling.
Oh, I did not know that.
Yeah, and WWE is what WWF is now known as.
Okay, that's what I thought. That's why I panicked, because at first I was like, oh, maybe it's WWE and WCW, but then I wasn't sure about WCW, but then I was like, I better say that just because I think, yeah, okay.
WWF, Oof. I think they were, sued by the World Wildlife Fund or something.
Oh my god.
And so they had to change their name, and so now they're WWE, but yeah.
Wow. I can't believe I got it.
Yeah, well done. So nowadays, the WWF, now known as the WWE, is the only major player in pro wrestling. But in the late 90s, wrestling was fucking huge. And the WWF was fighting against WCW and ECW. WCW's flagship show, Monday Nitro, aired in direct competition with WWF's Raw is War, now known as Monday Night Raw, in the so-called Monday Night Wars.
Does Raw stand for something?
I don't think so.
Oh.
I think it's just called Raw.
Okay.
Yeah. WCW was winning the ratings battle for a while, but mismanagement led the brand to fall apart, and Vince McMahon, the owner of WWF, bought out WCW on March 23rd, 2001. Around the same time, McMahon...
Was it a hostile takeover?
No. Basically, WCW was, like, falling apart internally, and they were, like, spending too much money on contracts and stuff, and so they were owned by Time Warner, I think, who had just merged with AOL, and were basically, like, trying to take the business in a different direction, and so they were, like, looking to sell off the assets, and so McMahon bought them.
Okay.
McMahon also purchased ECW, which had recently lost its TV contract and gone bankrupt. WWF hired ECW owner and creative head Paul Heyman as a commentator. I'll come back to that. So that's all the behind-the-scenes setup. Most of the rest of what I'm going to say is kayfabe, which is wrestling speak for what happens in story, right? So
Kayfabe?
Kayfabe, yeah, Kayfabe.
Is that just a made-up word?
Yes. For anyone who is unaware, pro wrestling is scripted. So,
really?
Yes, I know, right? So,
what a shock.
Yeah, so kayfabe is the term for, like, what happens in story.
Not in real life.
Right, exactly. So the final episode of Nitro featured the last WCW match between mainstays Ric Flair and Sting, then merged into a simulcast with Raw, in which Vince announced his intention to finalize his purchase of WCW at the upcoming WrestleMania event, but was interrupted by his son Shane, who announced that he had bought WCW out from under his father's nose. The invasion began in earnest after WrestleMania when Shane confronted Vince and former WCW wrestler Booker T attacked him from behind. The WCW talent were presented as heroic characters, called faces in wrestling parlance, fighting back against the power-mad villain, or heel, Vince. But the WWF fans rejected the WCW talent, and they were suddenly and unceremoniously turned heel en masse.
They made them all heels because they didn't like them?
Basically, the WWF fans didn't want to cheer for the WCW wrestlers, and so they kind of, like, shrugged and just made them all villains, essentially, yeah. In July, the former ECW roster attacked WWF wrestlers Chris Jericho and Kane, and Heyman abandoned the announce table to rally his troops. Shane and Vince briefly made peace to deal with ECW, but Shane almost immediately went back on his word as the WCW and ECW contingents took out the WWF wrestlers. Shane and Heyman high-fived and announced that WCW and ECW had merged to form the Alliance.
This is all in story, not
this is all
not real life.
Right, this was all, yeah. Like, the three of them...
Clear.
Right, so the three of them, my understanding is that all three of them were actually involved, like, in the creative side of this, behind the scenes. But yes, in story, this is what was happening.
Okay.
Yeah. The invasion angle led to its own pay-per-view, WWF Invasion, on July 22nd, in which WWF mainstay Stone Cold Steve Austin turned on the company and joined the Alliance. The next week, The Rock returned from a storyline suspension, which, outside of kayfabe, was actually to give him time off to film The Scorpion King. That terrible movie he was in.
He was trying to get into the acting world.
Yeah, I know, and now he's like the highest paid actor in the world, so
yes,
it worked.
Good for him.
Yeah, but that was like one of the first major things that he did, so in story he was suspended, but it was so that he could go shoot this movie.
Okay.
So he returned from suspension after this pay-per-view, and aligned himself with WWF, putting the company's two biggest stars on opposite sides of the ongoing Civil War. The invasion remained the overarching storyline for the next several months, with other side stories connected to it, and both sides trading victories, titles, and defections. It ended in November at the Survivor Series pay-per-view, when Team WWF, which was The Rock, Jericho, The Undertaker, Kane, and The Big Show, defeated Team Alliance, which was Shane, Austin, Booker T, Kurt Angle, and Rob Van Dam, in a 5-on-5 elimination match, which ended with The Rock defeating Austin, of course. So the WWF, quote, won the war, of course.
To make the fans happy.
Well, yes, and because apparently Vince McMahon has a humongous ego, so he would not let his side lose,
Even though this was all fake.
Yes.
Okay, whatever.
He is, by all accounts, kind of a prick. Yeah.
I see.
So the invasion storyline was very popular at the time, though it was criticized for not making the Alliance appear to be a credible threat to WWF, and relying on WWF talent to carry the Alliance. Meaning, basically, at that last pay-per-view, that 5-on-5 match, 3 of the Alliance team members were originally WWF personnel. So, only 2 of them actually ever came from ECW or WCW, yeah. And also for retreading the McMahon family feud storyline that had already been done several times before, and for a lack of top WCW and ECW talent being involved. So what should have been one of the biggest events of wrestling's biggest era ended up being one of the few moments in wrestling history that ever come up in trivia, but for all the wrong reasons.
What do you mean?
I mean, it comes up in trivia because it was such, a pivotal moment, both in the stories, but more importantly, in the actual behind-the-scenes history of this business, But, it should have been one of the biggest, most popular events ever, and instead it's been, criticized a lot because of all of this, mismanagement and, not making the Alliance look like they were a real threat and these kinds of things.
Oh,
so
okay.
Yeah. Yeah, pro wrestling does not come up in trivia too much, but this is one of the things that does sometimes crop up, so.
Okay.
Yep. Okay, so you are 1 for 4.
Yeah, I know.
Alright. Question 5, sounds and screen. What single-letter TV franchise began as an NBC miniseries in 1983, was rebooted on ABC in 2009, and features an alien race known as the Visitors invading Earth?
V.
It is V.
Yay!
Good.
I remember that show. It looked weird. I never watched it.
Apparently it's pretty good.
Was that lady with the short black hair?
Mm-hmm.
That's all I remember.
It was Marina Baccarin, I think.
Oh, really? Was it?
Pretty sure.
It didn't really look like her, but it was also a long time ago.
Pretty sure it's her, yeah.
I like her.
So, the 1980s incarnation of V, now sometimes referred to as V, the original miniseries, actually originated as more of a political satire than an alien invasion story. Director and producer Kenneth Johnson originally pitched a miniseries called Storm Warnings, an adaptation of Sinclair Lewis's novel It Can't Happen Here, which chronicled the rise of a populist dictator in the mold of Hitler or Mussolini in the United States. But NBC disliked the pitch because it was too cerebral for an American audience, which is the saddest thing I have ever said on this podcast.
That is horrible.
Yes. So they encouraged him to take the basic premise, but rework the homegrown fascists as reptilian aliens to increase the show's appeal to mainstream viewers. The parallels to fascism were retained, though. The Visitors' emblem is basically 75% of a swastika. The Visitors gain total control of the media, and there is even a youth paramilitary group called the Friends of the Visitors, which bears more than a passing resemblance to the Hitler Youth.
Uh-huh.
This show was not subtle.
Yeah.
The original miniseries begins with the Visitors, who appear pretty human-like at first, arriving in their motherships, offering to share their advanced technology in exchange for some of Earth's resources, which are needed to rebuild their dying homeworld, which orbits the star Sirius. Earth's governments accept this arrangement, and the Visitors gain considerable power around the world. Scientists become the target of attacks in the media, and public opinion slowly turns against them. Eventually, scientists become the scapegoats for the world's troubles and are directly persecuted. It is revealed that this is because they are the people who are most likely to uncover the Visitors' true nature. They aim to conquer and subdue the human race, and they are really carnivorous reptilian humanoids with a taste for live prey, including mice, humans, and most infamously, a guinea pig that is devoured by the high-ranking visitor Diana.
Ew.
A moment that Entertainment Weekly called, quote, one of the best TV reveals ever.
Nice.
The series chronicles the conflict between the Visitors and a human resistance, aided by dissenting visitors known as the Fifth Column. The symbol of the resistance is a red V, which is where the series gets its title. It ends on a cliffhanger of sorts, with the Visitors in total control and the resistance beaming a message into space begging for aid. It was followed up by a second miniseries, V, The Final Battle, and a weekly show, The Series, but I don't have time to talk about those.
Those were all in the 80s?
They're all in the same continuity,
Okay.
yeah. The premise of the 2009 reimagining is similar, though in that one the visitors have already infiltrated all of Earth's major power structures before revealing themselves, so their plan to conquer Earth is already in its final stages when the series kicks off. The militaristic aspects were also toned down, in favor of a more paranoid post-9/11 aesthetic, and a focus on questions of whether we can trust seemingly benevolent forces in the world. Some have suggested that the visitors, who bring a message of hope and a world free from disease, are an allegory for the presidency of Barack Obama, who ran on a similarly optimistic platform and pushed for universal health care, though the show's creators have denied any intended allegory, with executive producer Jeffrey Bell saying that it is simply, quote, a show about spaceships. Still, that is a weirdly specific comparison that it drew, and pretty far afield from the original miniseries' overt parallels to Nazism. I don't know. Apparently it's a pretty good show.
Cool.
Didn't watch it, but...
How many seasons?
Just 2.
Oh, okay.
So it wouldn't take too long, probably, to catch up on if we wanted to, but anyway, yeah.
Cool.
Alright, question 6, science. You now have 2 right, so you're up 12-11 on the season.
Yeah, that's not helpful.
You should get this one too, I think.
Yes, still a 2-point lead is not really enough, so...
Well, we'll see. There was one game this season where I only got 1 question right, so you could win with a 2-point lead if that happened again.
That's true, I don't think it's that hard.
Okay. So, alright, question 6 is science, and I will, in the spirit of friendly competition, remind you to remember what the theme of today's game is, as you think about the question.
Okay, thank you.
Kudzu in North America, Northern Pacific sea stars in Australia, eastern grey squirrels in Europe, and hedgehogs in Scotland and New Zealand are all examples of what?
Invasive species.
Correct. Yes.
Yay. That was easy.
Yeah, I guess I kind of backloaded that game a little more than I meant to, but...
That's okay.
Alright.
It happens. You can't predict these things for sure.
Yeah, no, not really. So an invasive species is defined as a non-native species that has been introduced to a new environment that has a tendency to spread unchecked, damaging the local ecosystem and threatening biodiversity. Or less commonly, an introduced species that spreads quickly and adversely affects the economy or human health. Basically, they outcompete native species because they reproduce quickly, spread widely, can survive in a wide variety of environments, and often lack natural predators. Well, that was a short discussion.
Yeah, really.
No, I'm not done.
Let's talk about hedgehogs running around in Scotland.
I'll get to the hedgehogs.
Sounds fun.
Obviously, no, I'm not done.
I know.
So I'll talk a little bit about how invasive species get into the new environments that they overrun, and then I'll go into a little bit of detail about each of those 4 examples from the question.
Did you read about zebra mussels?
I did,
That's
yes.
my favorite example.
I don't have anything about them in here, but yes, zebra mussels are another example of an invasive species.
Yeah, they invaded like the whole, I think it's Mississippi River?
Yeah, I think so.
Yeah, it's like crazy how much they exploded and
they're basically like,
up.
They're taking up like all the resources so that the native species are starving, basically.
Yeah, it's crazy. You should have talked about that. It's okay.
Well, I wanted a mix of different species.
Okay.
So I went with kudzu, which is a plant, sea stars, which are a fish, and then squirrels and hedgehogs, because I think they're funny. So
okay.
So before we get to those, though, it is worth noting that not all introduced species are invasive. For instance, the common goldfish is a small carp native to East Asia that is now widely found throughout North America, but does not tend to overpopulate and integrates pretty well into the ecosystems that it has been introduced to.
Mm-hmm.
Most invasive species reach their new environments because humans brought them there, either intentionally or unintentionally.
Right.
Although species can sometimes migrate by water or wind, as always, it's mostly our fault. Yep. Perhaps the earliest example was when prehistoric people unintentionally brought the Pacific rat to Polynesia from East Asia. Species can travel by hitching a ride on ships, being imported as pets which later escape, or intentionally, often in an attempt to control other pests, which is how the small Indian mongoose got to Central and South America, where it has since feasted on local species, driving several to the brink of extinction.
Right.
You know, like when you have a fire in your kitchen, so you blow up your house so there's no fuel left for the fire.
Right.
It's like that. Yeah.
There's also some interesting ones about, like, corn and like other crops at the time of like, exploration, and they brought a lot of those. I mean, those are technically invasive species because...
Well, they're introduced species. But I think most crops are not invasive because they're usually controlled, like on a farm. Like they don't just spread like crazy.
Right. Bamboo. Bamboo spreads like crazy.
Yes, it does. Bamboo,
that's a problem.
Yes, bamboo is definitely a candidate for an invasive species. Yeah.
It was invading my whole backyard growing up. It was a problem. It was a serious problem. Felt like I was living in China, actually.
So I don't have any information on bamboo, but I do have information about kudzu, which has been called the vine that ate the South. Kudzu is a ridiculously resilient weed native to Asia, which was introduced to the U.S. in 1876 when it was promoted as an ornamental bush. In the 30s and 40s, farmers were encouraged to plant the stuff to combat soil erosion. Yeah, oops. It has spread over 7 million acres of land in the American South, smothering the native plants, and it shows no signs of stopping.
Wow.
The best way to control it is just to keep a bunch of goats on hand to eat it and keep it in check, because it's resistant to most pesticides and grows like, well, a weed.
Yeah, wow.
Yeah. So, yeah, kudzu, there are some areas in the South where, I was looking at pictures of this, like, you'll see the shape of a tree, but it's just covered in kudzu. Like, you can't actually see the tree, because the kudzu is just, like, covering it entirely. East Asia, originally.
And in East Asia, it's, like, fine.
Well, yeah, I mean, it has natural predators in East Asia. There are, like, bugs and shit that eat
that's the answer.
Yeah, great. Bring in more invasive species, right? Like the fucking mongooses that, like, destroy the South American ecosystem. Oh, boy. The northern Pacific sea star, aka the Japanese common starfish, is native to the waters around China and Japan, but has invaded Australia. The tiny larvae get sucked into ships taking on water as ballast, and then unleashed into the waters wherever the ship is going they mature there, and then proceed to wreak havoc on the local ecosystem because these fuckers will eat basically anything. So.
But starfish are so cute.
Not when they're destroying your local ecosystem because they're eating everything in sight.
No, not really.
No.
What do they eat? Like algae or fish or?
Fish.
Fish. Oh, that's fair. I like fish.
Yeah. The eastern gray squirrel is native to North America, where they are essential to regenerating forests after fires because they bury a lot of seeds. In Europe, they are a pest and are crowding out the native red squirrels, which are smaller and can store less fat for winter, and therefore do not reproduce as much. Numerous measures have been proposed to try to control their spread, including encouraging celebrity chefs to promote eating the squirrels.
Ew!
Not a joke.
So who's cooking squirrels?
I don't think that program is working very well, but that is one of the many things that have been done to try to control the spread of the eastern gray squirrel in Europe.
They're super annoying.
I fucking hate squirrels, yeah.
Me too, especially the eastern gray squirrel. Specifically.
Yeah, they're so obnoxious.
Yes. Especially when they're inside your house.
When were they inside your house?
Growing up.
Oh, yeah.
When we had squirrels in our attic all the time.
That's
making
right.
their little noises. Very creepy. Anyway.
And lastly, hedgehogs. Hedgehogs are native to Europe, Asia, and Africa, and have been introduced to other environments as part of the pet trade, and have become invasive pests in many places. The problem is that they lack natural predators and eat local insects, snails, lizards, and birds. Hedgehogs also present a unique problem, which is that they're cute as hell.
They're so cute.
So efforts to control them tend to meet with a lot of public opposition.
Yeah, because they're so cute, you can't get rid of them.
Right, so you can't just go around poisoning hedgehogs or encouraging people to eat them like squirrels, because people love hedgehogs.
Gross.
So that's the unique problem that is posed by the hedgehog as an invasive species, is people like hedgehogs, and so it's like really hard to find a politically palatable way of trying to curb their spread.
Do you think that's why they're illegal in Pennsylvania?
That is why they're illegal in Pennsylvania. Yes.
So that's the key. The key was to not remove
to not introduce them
laws.
In the first place.
So like all the states, I think they used to be illegal, but then after people started liking them,
that's right.
They convinced
we read
them
about this a while
to
back.
make
That's right.
it legal. But Pennsylvania and California are the two left that are still where they're still illegal, and like what I read a long time ago is basically, like, they're just too lazy. Like, they don't really have a reason for keeping it illegal. Like, I can't remember if it was Pennsylvania or California, but, like, a little boy, like, tried to, like, fight the power. And
I think it was Pennsylvania.
Yeah, he, like, made a whole, like, argument for why they should make it legal because he really wanted a hedgehog, blah, blah, blah. And they were just like, oh, we don't have time for this. So they're still illegal.
Yeah.
Which is a little sad because I want one. I wouldn't, like, introduce them to it's not like a starfish larva. Like, you have one. If you're not, like, just, like, setting it free to reproduce in the wild, in the forests of Philadelphia. Like,
sometimes the pets escape, though. That does happen. And that's how some invasive species get where they are.
Okay, fine.
Yeah. But yeah, they're a pest.
I'm sure some people are harboring illegal hedgehogs.
Yes.
I highly considered it. But then I decided it probably wasn't worth it.
No, it is not worth risking jail time to have a hedgehog in the house.
No, I know.
Alright. So, you are now up 13 to 11 on the season. Yes.
Correct.
Okay. So, we will see next week if I can overcome that deficit and win, or if Hallie will become a back-to-back champion. So, next week, one of us will become the first ever 2-time Quizzish champion.
Correct.
Unless,
or it will be a tie.
In which
and
case,
we'll live happily ever after in a tie. And it will be great.
Strongly think that we should come up with some kind of tiebreaker rule.
I know, you can't handle that.
No.
You could not live happily in a tie.
It's too anticlimactic.
I guess. Okay, fine.
Alright. So, we'll be back with that next week. In the meantime, if you like the show and you want to get in touch, you can email us at quizandhers@gmail.com. We are on social media. We are Quiz and Hers on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. We are on all podcasting platforms that we are aware of, so if you enjoy this, make sure to like, subscribe, rate, and review. And
we're on YouTube.
We are on YouTube. All of our episodes are on YouTube for some reason. You can just...
If you like listening to podcasts on YouTube, I won't judge you.
Yeah, so you can just search Quiz and Hers. It will pop right up. Yep. And I guess that's it. Thank you guys for listening.
Yep.
And we will be back next week with the conclusion of Season 3.
Mm-hmm.
Alright, bye.
Bye.
So, the invention of the modern hostile tender offer is usually credited to financier Lewis Wolfson, who unsuccessfully attempted a hostile takeover of The invention of the modern hostile tender is all... Yes? Bless you.
Thank you. I was holding that in real hard. I was like, if I fuck him up on the third time he's trying to say this, he's gonna shoot me.